Hello, this is John Egan, University of Hawaii. This is one more in our short series of definitions that relate to the international law that covers international humanitarian assistance. One of the terms that we want to have a basic working definition for is the word treaty. Again, this is the sort of thing everyone has a good idea what they think a treaty is, but in fact it has a legal definition, and it's useful to know it because it has a lot of impact on how international humanitarian assistance gets organized. So we're going to ask the question, what is a treaty? Well, a treaty is a part of international law. International law is the law that governs relationships between nation states. We get this definition straight out of Black's Law Dictionary, which is a basic reference for English language American law. You'll find other definitions elsewhere, but most of these will lead you pretty much to the same conclusion. Historically, international law related to relationships between countries and had very little to say on the relationship of governments to their people or to people of different countries to each other. That's beginning to change, but historically, international law was specifically set out for defining relationships between countries. One of the things that is very interesting about how this has developed is that we look for where law comes from, and we really see in international law two primary sources: international customs and treaties. So treaties are a major part of how we create international law. International customs have to do with those practices that have evolved over time and have become recognized by governments over time so that they have authority of law. So we have, when we characterize the types of law, certainly those laws that are written down for the purpose of recording the law are really critical and central to how we understand it. And treaties are considered to be right in there as part of that process. The statutes, the treaties, written down laws are the explicit form of international law. Getting a little bit more specific with this, a treaty defines a relationship between two or more states or international organizations. We know that a treaty is international law because it's intended to be legally binding, and a treaty is intended to be governed by international law. I think people are familiar with the term to be a party to a treaty. To be a party to a treaty means that the state or the international organization has consented to be bound by the legal characteristics of the treaty. So again, there's an interesting piece here. We know that international law deals with relationships between states, but when we look to the definition of treaty, we also see that international organizations are participants in the treaty process. An international organization can be a party to a treaty. The other thing that's very interesting is how many different names treaties go by. Treaties are also known as international agreements, covenants, protocols, charters, statutes, declarations, any number of different things. What's important to know about this is that all of these documents are recognized in international law as equal. All of these have the same function in international law. So international agreements or treaties create law for the parties to the treaty. So with respect to the responsibilities that a nation enters into when they sign a treaty, that is the law with respect to the countries signing on. It's also interesting that when you look at the long-term effect of a treaty, if a treaty becomes broadly accepted and countries adhere to it, whether or not they've signed it, it can become customary law. Remember, that was another part of the formation of international law. A treaty that becomes universally accepted or is adhered to by many parties can in fact become part of customary law and even be binding on those countries that have not actually signed it. So there are some particular characteristics there that have to be lined up in order for that to happen. But there is a place where you can find that information as well. The Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. In effect, it's a law about the law of treaties. It's a treaty about treaties. And how these things get put into place are well defined there. We have included a copy of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties in your reference material on the website, so take a look at that if it's of interest to you. Now, why is this of interest to us in the humanitarian world? Well, we have some really important examples of treaty law that are right at the heart of what we do. One of them, of course, is the Geneva Conventions, convention meaning treaty. Very beginning of modern humanitarian work, we trace back to Henri Dunant and the formation of the International Committee of the Red Cross. When he founded that organization, he took two very important steps. One was the establishment of relief activities, field medicine, family reunification, all of the activities that the Red Cross carries out in the field. But at the very same time, he started drafting the Geneva Conventions, which has become the basis for modern humanitarian law. So right at the very beginning of modern humanitarianism, treaty law and the actual relief activities were bound together. Henri Dunant realized that he had to have a legal basis for the activities, as well as a physical, on-the-field activity basis. So the other part that we want to take a look at is the whole body of modern human rights law is made up of a series of treaties. Everything from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights through to the more recent conventions, such as the Convention Against Torture. These are all treaties, and they all relate and are binding in the very same way. Countries sign them, and by signing them, they consent to be bound by them. So the basis, the ethical basis of humanitarian practice is really grounded in treaty law. The third thing that's very important, we now, I would say, have come to the point where a very important part of what we do as humanitarians is coordinated by or coordinated with international organizations, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, but also the specialized agencies of the United Nations, and others as well. International organizations come into being when a treaty is signed. Nation states agree to put that entity into existence. So they're organic documents, they're articles of incorporation, so to speak, essentially are treaties. So when you look to see how does an international organization participate in a humanitarian situation, what is their legal basis for participation, the document that you will look to for their mandate is in almost all cases a treaty. So this is where we come to. The basis of humanitarian work is founded in ethical basis, and those ethics are bound in law. The law, the particular type of law that you're looking for is treaty law, and that's why it's important for us to have a grasp of what treaties are and how they work. Thank you.